Officer down! I repeat, officer down!
Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler, a podcast created for a first responder by a first responder. If you are not a first responder, you still are welcome. This podcast is aimed directly at trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is complex and often misunderstood. Our brave men and women who serve our communities often end up with behavioral and psychological issues as a result of experienced trauma from their careers. My goal is to share what I know, my personal experience with PTSD as a retired police officer, and continue to advocate for mental health while providing support to those still in their careers. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical help, and I strongly suggest if you are in fact suffering, you seek out professional medical advice. Please join me on this episode as I continue to expose the reality of PTSD challenges. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler, and today I am joined by a former corrections officer. He has over 14 years of experience and has an unbelievable story of how he entered into the world of workplace trauma, experienced it, eventually ended up being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but also was able to challenge himself to grow from that place and heal. Welcome to the show. I'm honored to have you for the second time.
I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here and happy to be able to share my story.
You and I, just to give the listeners kind of an overview of how you and I kind of know each other, we started way back when I was first entering into sobriety, and I was on TikTok, and I was learning that it was really important for me to share my story in order for me to promote my own healing in regards to mental health. Now, you came out then and you said, wow, let's have a conversation because I've been through a lot of the stuff that you've been through. We connected that way, and your story is truly, truly unbelievable. So before we dive into the meat and potatoes of what happened to you in the world of corrections, I'd love to kind of hear who you were before that.
I started out, basically went to college and university, got my degree back east, went to Barry, Ontario to college, and then off to the University of Ottawa. Main goal was to become an RCMP officer. That was my main goal. But unfortunately, back then, it was the competition rate was so high and so great that there was people with doctorate degrees and you name it that were getting in. And the test back then was, stuff, words I've never even heard of before in my life, questions in math that were like, okay, I don't know, I'm not a rocket scientist. I have no idea. So that's stood on the wayside for a while. And ran into an old friend of mine who I used to train with, who owned a gym when I played football. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, well, just bouncing at a bar and, doing other stuff. Had a landscaping company as well. And he's like, well, why don't you come and bounce at the jail? You'll make good money. And I said, sure. It sounded good. Put my application. Week later, had an interview. A few days after that, had my poly and all that, and it was kind of fast-tracked. There was in training.
What kind of person were you then? And I'm just thinking personality-wise, were you calm? Were you excitable? What kind of behavioral patterns did you have at the time? Were you sleeping well? I just want to get an overall general sense of like how healthy you were as an individual then.
Oh, I slept well, ate well. I was I guess you could say, the class clown that still stayed within my life. Outgoing, helpful, helping people. Had tons of friends. Never had. I was always doing something. Going fishing, going camping. You name it.
The moment you went off for training then and getting into the world of corrections, what does the journey look like for you as you entered that space or that workplace?
It was exciting. It was it was a lot of knowledge to take in, all book related. The on hands portion, you ran into some sour people that were just, like, what do you want to do this job for? The guys, you're going to get those guys. But there were a lot of other people like, hey, it's a great career. It's very rewarding. Um, and I love to help people. That's, why I wanted to get into, this line of work. And I seen what it was like firsthand, doing my job shadowing and stuff like that, etc. And everybody's got their own way on handling, how they do things. And fortunate enough for me, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. Um, my brothers were continuously in trouble all the time. And actually, there was numerous times where one of my brothers was coming into custody while I was working. And so it wasn't a shock to me about that exposure of, what prison life was like, what people were like with addictions and mental health and all these other things. It was, I kind of had a bit of that skill level where I was able to understand and, I guess, be a little bit empathetic when these guys were clean and sober.
Absolutely. Compassion is a very big part of someone who is in that role in life, serving people in those vulnerable states, right? When their world is upside down. And that's usually what happens with people that become incarcerated. They're charged with something, they're going off to prison. Life isn't great for them, and they're trying to hopefully be rehabilitated to get back into society. Now, what was some of the trauma like that you experienced? And we'll talk a little bit about the smaller trauma for now.
Yeah, I guess the smaller trauma, I guess, to be honest with you, some of the smaller trauma was to begin with was coming from some of the old school guards that were there that were supervisors. I can remember walking my very first solo shift, into into the walls, right? It's just, you come down the stairs, you're walking in, and you've got, okay, now it's real. I'm going into a unit with murderers, rapists, guy who stole a bike, guy who, everybody you could think of that's done something wrong, and they're in there for a reason. Walking through, first words out of one of the supervisors' mouth was, "Hey, don't fuck up. Thanks for thanks for the encouragement. Appreciate it." Um,
What did he mean by that?
it was just he was just one of these guys that was just a jerk, and uh, he it was just to put pressure on you. What happened was, I had to do a formal count, and I missed a guy, and jail went into lockdown. And he comes over there. I told you you're going to screw this up. So right away, it was just kind of like, oh, what did I get myself into here?
For sure. What was the energy like when you walked into that space?
It was like walking into. I did auxiliary policing and stuff like that as well before, and reserve, and walking into that environment was like walking into a morgue. Like, everybody, just, it was almost like very uh, robotic. Everybody just kind of had their track. They followed that track. They sat at their desks. They did their rounds. They just basically did the bare minimum what was required of the job.
And what were some of the things that you may have picked up as you may have interacted with inmates? What was the energy coming from them?
The energy coming from those guys, a lot of it was, uh, I found, was they needed someone to talk to, and a lot of them came across very needy, depending on what their charges were. Um, I had guys in there that were in there for multiple murders, and they were the most quiet, um, under the radar guys that you would ever think of. Didn't look for trouble, didn't ask for trouble. If they came up, it was yes, sir, no, sir, and that was about it. The guys that were in there for little petty things, they could have a bruise on their apple and they would make a big deal about it as if it was like it was the end of the world for them.
So, some of those small traumas that you were starting to experience as a prison guard, do you want to talk about maybe some of the larger traumas you experienced while in corrections?
Yeah, I guess. Well, I moved up the ladder fairly quickly, and I was called the Golden Boy for quite a long time. I was working in records, and that was a very hard post to get into. Um, at that point, the small trauma there was, dealing with individuals. Like I had to strip guys down naked and do complete searches on them, like not physical touching them, but getting them stripped down, etc. And all of a sudden, I'd have their files in front of me, and all of a sudden having to look at their files and what they did, and some of the stuff was just I'd look at some of the stuff and it was just like, oh my God, like wow. And it got to the point in that department where it was almost like it was you become very cynical, where we'd get guys that would be in there for a charge that was so bad, like we're talking um, child pornography or uh, sexual assault on children, etc. And you know we'd sit there when the guy would get sent to a unit, and once he was out those doors, we'd some of us would sit around and go, okay, how long is that guy going to last on the unit? Like we'd actually make bets on how long that guy was going to get punched, how long it would take for him to get punched out on the unit. 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, right, etc. Those are the little things. Seeing a guy getting punched out because he sat at the wrong table in a unit. Those were some of the small things that were just kind of like, it felt like it was just normal everyday things. Like this is just part of their everyday routine here.
Obviously, as you're coming in, you are a compassionate individual, and you want to help people, keep them safe, right? That's kind of how you're coming into corrections, and now seeing the level of violence that happens inside the doors, inside the walls. And I'm sure there's a bit of a code, because I've heard this before from others, that some of the offenders that go in that have done some very heinous things, horrible acts, horrible crimes, a lot of inmates actually don't like those people and they will be very violent towards them. So, one, your challenge is to continue to try and hold compassion for every single offender that's in that place, which is extremely difficult for one. And now you're having these people who are very angry towards other inmates for various crimes they've done. They're becoming violent to them, and I'm sure to you as well. So, is that true? What I'm talking about right now?
Yeah, there's definitely a code. Um, it's there's certain words you don't say in prison. Like if you called somebody a goof or stop goofing around, goof was meant that you were a skinner, a rapist, pedophile, etc. Like that was the worst word you could say in jail. Second one was a clown. Just little words that we take for granted on the outside. Like oh, you're such a goof, right? Joking around, but you say that in jail, man, it's on full blown. I've seen one officer walk up to a guy and just said, "Hey, man, can you kind of stop goofing around?" And the guy stood up and clocked the guy. Officer fell on the ground. He got booted in the head probably about 40 times, and he was a rookie. And his, the movie the Elephant Man. That's what his head looked like afterwards. And it was, I seen that. I responded to that code, and that's when it kind of looked at me like, wow, like yeah, it kind of shook me up a little bit, but of course, you're told, suck it up, get back to work. I was one of the first responders at that time inside the jail, where my job was basically, since um, I was a fairly big guy then, I was like 235, and my job was basically sitting in an office and go around and deal with all the crap and going around and if a fight broke out, went in there and dealt with it, or if somebody wasn't following direction or was being combative or verbally abusive to staff or anybody else, that was my job, was to go deal with it, and the fight was on, right? So
Sounds like a pressure cooker.
oh, it was, yeah. We had to respond to codes where we didn't know what was going on at the point in time, just like policing. Like, you can get a call for a domestic. You don't know what's happening until you get there, right? You don't know what the situation's like. You don't know what the injuries are like. Gone to one code one time where one officer, they call it a code yellow. Jail goes into total lockdown. Run down, respond to the unit. Um, so we have secondaries that are there with us who make sure all the inmates are locked up. We either jump into the fight, and the battle's on to try and break it up, or if it's an assault on an officer, well, man, what happens there. We're not going to lose. And my first real bad code was a guy in a bath in a shower room. We were looking for what happened. I could see blood on the floor, and I could see blood on the officer, and I'm checking, like, I'm just talking to him, and he's like a good friend of mine, and he was just in total shock. So I actually had to grab him by the collar and shake him and just say, "Where is he?" And he goes, "In the shower." So we went to the shower room, and there's a guy laying on the ground, and basically, literally, he was beaten so bad, half of his face was ripped right off. Like, I could see his teeth, his jaw, his eye socket, his ear hanging off. And so we call code blue for healthcare to come up. And all of a sudden, that's all this guy thinks of. He's now the guy comes around, and it's fight or flight for him. So he wants to start fighting again. So it's, we're covered in blood trying to hold this guy on the ground. And so, that was one of the first bad ones. And, then it just progresses where you kind of trying to digest what happened. What did I just see? Why did this happen? And you realize that, not, there's some not bad guys in there when they're sober. I'll be totally honest with you. I had a good rapport with the inmates. When I was running units, it was, I considered it their house. I was there to babysit. And I told those guys that. I said, but let me make one thing clear. You cause trouble for me, it's going to come back 100 times fold on you. And so I never had codes on my unit. If it happened when I was off my shift.
Something you talked about that was very fascinating for me, and I saw this, I don't know how many times as a police officer you would go to a call and someone would be knocked out or hurt or whatever, but basically in an unconscious state or even just overdosed from drugs. And when those people come back to their brain, the last moment that the brain was actually kind of conscious and recording or operating, if there was a fight that was happening and they've been knocked unconscious, they pick up where they last left off. So a lot of times when you get there and you're responding to someone who's unconscious, they go right back into fight or flight when they come to, and the fight's on again. And that was actually something that for me was very abnormal at first, the first time I experienced, but after I began to understand the whys, much like you said, that's why people go back into that state right away. But not a lot of people know that. So I wanted to talk about that because it's kind of an interesting thing how the body goes through this, the trauma, and then continues to fight when they come back out of unconsciousness. So for me, obviously hearing some of the story too about what you're going through and inside the walls of corrections, and the trauma that existed, at what point, like I'm obviously getting a story from you that you most likely entered your career feeling safe for the most part on the inside. When was it for you that you started to feel unsafe?
To be honest with you, I've never felt unsafe for my personal safety. I actually had such a good relationship with some of the inmates that if an inmate, I can give you a quick Reader's Digest version of a story that had happened. I was on working a night shift, and I walked by a cell, and this one guy's, calling me, every name you could think of every time I walked by his cell. So I'd walk back and look in his porthole, and he'd pretend he was sleeping. So the next time I went and did my rounds, I kind of walked by and I'd snap my head back real quick with my flashlight and flash it in. And I caught him saying it. And I said, "That's it. I'm charging you for verbal abuse for a staff member." Well, it was my days off. He went to, we call it warden's court, where they get discipline or what have you. And so he got a few days in segregation. He pled guilty. And so it turns out to be that I was covering an overtime shift, and I was working in a unit. And it was called J Unit, so we called it the jungle. And this is where they put the worst of the worst. We had 5 or 6 codes a day in this unit. It was just bad. And so I was covered in there, and I got all these big guys that were from the mainland. And our jail, we got a lot of people that were involved in some high, I guess, high public cases that happened within Surrey, like the Surrey Six, etc., and stuff like that. UNs, we had the Bacons, Red Scorpion, you name it. Any type of gang member that was brought to our jail could not be on the mainland for their personal safety. So they'd bring them over to us. And I had about 5 or 6 guys surround my desk, and I'm like, "All right, you guys, back up. I know what you guys are trying to do here." And they're like, "Hey, what's going on? This guy's calling you names. He's saying this, he's saying that." And so, just saying to these guys, like in passing, like, "That guy's giving me a hard time on my night shifts." I said, "I'm away from my family. I don't really need to be putting up with this crap." Well, unit justice, I tell you, they do have a code. And sometimes when you do get along with these guys and you treat them, the key word is with respect. They went and thumped this guy out. And I got this guy standing beside my desk, and he's just like, "Hey, sir, I need to apologize to you." And I just looked at him. I didn't look at him. I just told him, "Beat it, get away from my desk." And looked up at him, and all of a sudden he goes, "No, I'm serious, man. I need to apologize to you. Please, can you accept my apology?" Well, I looked up, and this guy's got like blood coming down his nose, big, huge shiner. And I just said, "Okay, back to your cell." I said, "You're not going anywhere. Go put some ice on your face." I said, and I approached the other guys. I said, "Enough's enough." I said, "I'm not going to charge anybody." I said, "I understand you guys' code." I said, "But this is where it ends, right?" "Yep. But we're not going to have them talk to you like that. You treat us with respect."
A fascinating world inside the walls of prison. For you, now that you're going through all of these different events, at what point do you start to recognize that the body is starting to shift or change, or your mental health or overall health is being impacted by maybe some of the trauma or the stress?
I noticed that probably around my 4th year, I could say, maybe my third, that, you know, uh, we work we're not in a public eye like policing, paramedics, firefighters. Um, so I can say a lot of us got it, that it was that I don't give a shit attitude anymore, right? These guys are just shit rats. Who gives a shit? And that started following me home, where um, at the time I had a stepdaughter, and she'd be doing stuff, and her mom would make a huge ordeal about it. You know what? I don't give a shit. Other little things would happen. You know what? It was just more things just to chuck in the pile, where it's like, you know what? I don't want to hear about this crap. I don't want to hear about that. Um, and just things compounded over a while, where uh, it was, uh, you try and shut that door when you leave the jail, and like, okay, done work, going home. After a while, it worked for a little while, but it compounded, where that stuff just bottles up in your brain and your body, where I started becoming very agitated very easily by certain things. Like I remember one incident where I went out and bought a brand new TV, and I had the box on the big TV box. There was probably about a 60-inch TV at the time, and I was excited to have it. Plug it in, get it all hooked up. Well, it didn't work. Plugged it in, and the screen was all full of lines, and I just snapped. I grabbed the box. I started punching it, kicking it. I lost it. And my uh, partner at the time, she kind of looks at me like, like, wow, who the hell is this guy? And I kind of sat there for a second and kind of I could see the fear, and I could almost see that side of her looking at me like I've never seen this guy before. And so I just kind of looked at her and said, I need to go for it. I'm going to take a drive. And that's where I started recognizing some things, um, that were changing in my life. Like we'd go to, well, you can probably relate to this totally, and anybody else that's in law enforcement. We'd go to Tim Hortons, we'd go to Starbucks, we'd go to a restaurant. Man, there's not one day I could ever have my back to a door. I had to see who was coming. I had to see who was going. Um, I could be sitting down at the beach, and all of a sudden there's an ex-offender walking by me, and stuff like this. Sitting in a food court in the mall, ex-offender comes up to me, and these were things that were just, uh, I'm not me anymore. It's that uh, you're that cynical side of you comes out where okay, now you got your guard up, your spidey senses are going off, so I'm ready to rock and roll in case something goes sideways. But it was just a guy coming over to me saying, hey, thanks for everything you did for me, you're awesome, blah 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 blah. But you know there's a point where you really still try to help people, like when you're at work. um it's a um different demeanor, where that part of your life is now. Your outside life has changed. I can remember being at work where I loved going to work. I loved the mix. I just thrived on it. I, you know, it wasn't so much the chaos. It was more the, you know, getting in there. Like if something happened, or if my boss called me up, and said, "Hey, we're going to do this." Man, I was jacked. I was ready to roll. It was just like I was excited. I never missed a day. I was never late. Um, I was always happy to be at work, and it was, yeah, it was just that was a new me. You know, I didn't know it, but I changed. I wasn't the guy that was, you know, happy and enjoy my days off. My days off, I just basically went to the gym and spent some time with a few. I didn't have my outside friends anymore. I just associated with my other colleagues that I had, where my life became separated, where the me that was didn't exist anymore.
It's almost for me too, like as I reflect even on my own journey to kind of see what you're saying, where it registers for me, it definitely hits me in the point where I recognize now, and this is something that happens in PTSD, you don't really realize how you're changing in the moment. It's not until years later when you can look back, hopefully from a place of health, and go, oh wow, I definitely did change and this is what it looks like. And there's no shame in not being able to pick up on when that change or that shift starts to happen. It's just kind of how it goes. But for me, the point where like I was starting to really shut down and not care anymore about anything that happened around me. Now I reflect back on, now that was definitely a coping system for me that I was trying to use, because I was constantly being overwhelmed by trauma and by the emotional response of having to go to some very difficult calls in the beginning as a police officer. So very much like you're doing the same thing. You're now trying to control what you're letting in, and you're saying, I can't be a part of this. And it starts to transfer, you're right, even into your personal life. You can no longer have, a relationship with someone who has these massive issues, which are very significant to them. But when you look at them from all the trauma you've been through, you look at them and you go, these are completely insignificant. I just went through X, Y, and Z, which was so much worse. The fact that you're losing your mind on the daughter for X, Y, and Z doesn't matter. Stop. Don't do this. And it actually causes massive issues in personal relationships as well. So I'm actually super grateful that you brought that up. Because it's a really important part to understand in the journey of, you will get to a place where you can no longer take on more and you start to push stuff away. And that's that's not healthy.
No, it's not. And, and that was a bit of a downfall on my part, I guess. I didn't recognize it, right? And you don't, because you're still in that realm where you're still kind of, you can be 5 years in, you're still new, you're still learning. It's a job that consists of, no day is ever the same. And just like probably in policing too, there's no job there's not one call that's ever going to be the same. It's always different. I've seen guys that would take razor blades and slice themselves from wrist up to the under their arms. Guys taking headers off a top tier because they got a sentence that they didn't like. Guys getting raped and stuff like this, and just a lot of things that were just kind of like, this is the new me that I'm exposed to. And we didn't really have anybody to talk to. And then we had they eventually had a CERT team that was uh, put together from volunteers that worked at the. And so our CERT team was a critical um, emergency response team. So they wasn't like the ERT. They basically came, and if it was a very traumatic code that the officer had to deal with, they'd come sit there with them and talk to them, and find out if they need to get some counseling, take the rest of the day off. But if you did take that rest of the day off, oh boy, you were in the doghouse. You're weak. You're never working certain units. You're not going to work certain posts. So I found that out very quickly, that you're not going to um, you know, get the respect that you should unless you just deal with it, get it over with. I had some guy who literally just got the living daylights beaten out of him, and they came down to talk to me, and I was just like, nah, get out of my unit, go away. Don't need to talk to you. And my unit was up and running, and next thing you know, I'm pulled into a manager's office and getting a pat on the back. Good job.
Sanctuary trauma. Completely sanctuary trauma.
Yeah, yeah. And so things progressed. Uh, like I said, my older brother, he was in custody quite a few times. He had some severe addiction problems, which also led to some mental health issues. And uh, I still remember this day. You can't remember, it's hard not to remember certain events. And my partner at the time and I were driving up a roadway, and we saw him pushing out. I said, just looked over. I said, oh, look at these two bums over here pushing a shopping cart, looking for bottles on Canada Day, where there was a parade. And so these two carts full of cans and bottles, etc. And all of a sudden, I look over, and I said, "Oh my God, is this my brother?" So I pulled off into a pullout on the waterway, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, it's my brother. I'm going to say hi." "Oh no, you're not." You know, we got my daughter in the car. You're not doing that. And so I said, oh, yes, I am. That's my brother. Well, the fight was on and the argument started. And I just thought, okay, you know what? Fair enough. Let's go. Drove around the corner and there's a police roadblock. I knew my brother was on conditions. And they pulled up the roadblock and I knew all the members that were there because I dealt with them for years. And they're just like, oh, yeah, how's it going? And in my gut, I wanted to say, hey, my brother's around the corner. He's got conditions and he's just pissed out of his tree. But I didn't because he's my brother, right? Didn't want to get him any more trouble. Well, 2 days go by. I get a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning from my dad. And my dad's, he's ex-military, PPCLI, old school. And just phones me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, I've answered the phone on me. Hello? I'm like, oh, hey, Dad, what's up? And he's just like, well, your brother's dead. Call me later on. And that was it. And so I'm kind of sitting there on the couch and it didn't hit me. And all of a sudden, I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, well, what do I do? So I phoned up work and I said, hey, sorry, I can't make it in today. And they're like, oh, what's the problem? I said, well, I just found out my brother's dead. And they were just like, what? Your brother? I go, yeah. And they're just like, oh my God. Well, take as much time as you need. And I was like, oh no, I can come back on, I can't remember what day it was. So if I called in on a Wednesday, I'll be back for my shift on Thursday or Friday. Oh no, 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 no. No, I need to come back to work. And so the relationship part of that was I had to go to the RCMP detachment that had to file for my brother's death. And I was there and newer constable took me down into this, the room, the little rooms they have with the cameras, etc. And sitting on the couch, and he's like, "So, is this your brother's stuff? And this your brother?" And showed me some pictures, and I'm like, "Yep, that's him." So, when's the last time you seen your brother? I said, "Actually, I said on Canada Day." I said, which was like 3 days ago. Oh, really? Yep. So, what was your relationship like with your brother? I said, well, didn't really see him that much. I said he had addiction problems. I said, and really the only time I seen him was when he was in custody. Oh, so I guess you guys didn't get along, hey? And I said, where are you going with this? And he goes, well, I'm just trying to figure out, you seen your brother at the waterway and your his body was found in the waterway. So I was just trying to timeline. I said, are you insinuating that I pushed my brother into the water? I said, you better get your supervisor down here now. And so the supervisor came down, who I knew very well. And he just barely looked at me and just told the other guy, to get lost, and shook my hand, gave me, the bro hug. Hey, sorry about your brother. Here's his effects. And they just got to wait for the autopsy to be done and all that stuff. So dealt with that. And I can remember picking up his two daughters a few days later, getting the funeral arrangements made. And we went to the cemetery to pick a plot. And my cell phone ringing and ringing and ringing. And my dad's like, who is it? I said, oh, it's my wife. Oh, who is it? Oh, it's my wife. And all of a sudden my dad's like, would you just answer the damn phone? When are you going to pick me up for Starbucks? You told me you're going to take me to Starbucks. You're ruining my whole day. I said, I'm ruining your day? I said, I'm here picking out a burial spot to bury my brother. And so that's where things kind of just escalated from there, where it was like, oh, your job's more important than me. you're not the same guy anymore. You don't show me any compassion. You don't do anything. Etc. And of course, what I do, I just, yeah, okay, no, you're not. You're wrong. I'm right. So I, she could probably see the signs, but I didn't want to admit to the signs.
Yeah, for sure. Denial is usually easier than admitting kind of what's going on in the moment, especially if you don't know where you are in the journey with PTSD. Now, you also go through something very significant too with your sister, and I'd love to hear that story. We can do that story in a shorter version if it's easier for you, but it's all about how you manage the trauma from the experiences that you've had in your life. So, and I think this is also a very important part to kind of your story of how ultimately things continued to get worse.
Yeah, so I dealt with that. Um, that was in 2008. That happened with my brother. Um, I got a lot of support from my colleagues because my brother was in custody quite often, and you know, when he was clean and sober, he would. This is the type of guy who'd give you his shirt off his back. All the officers there just loved the guy for some reason, right? And um, I didn't get it because I seen what he was like growing up, and I thought, geez, what do these guys see him that I don't see? I said, guy's a prick, right? Uh, so one day I'm out of that relationship, and I'm at my girlfriend's place, and my sister, she liked the bad boy image type of thing, and so I'm at this girl's house, and all of a sudden it was really weird. Okay, I'll tell you just one. I don't think I ever told you this portion before, but I'll Reader's Digest version. We're laying in bed, pitch black. We're sitting there chit chatting, and all of a sudden, this bright white light comes in, like a little orb or something like that, and hovers right above my head in my face. And I'm kind of looking at it, and it just starts spinning around in circles and stuff like this. And all of a sudden, it starts making a crisscross sign, and then it spins really, really fast and just disappears. And I kind of look at her. I go, "Did you see that?" And she goes, "Well, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want you to think I was crazy." And I said, "What the hell was that?" And she goes, "I have no idea. I've never seen anything like that before." And hour and a half later, I get a phone call again from my dad. Again, old school army guy. Uh, Phone rings, and I look at it, call display, mom and dad. And I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, something happened to my mom or dad. And uh, same words. Barry, yep, your sister's dead. Oh, okay, I'll be right there. So she lived not too far from my parents. And so right away, I'm chucking my clothes on, boogieing over there. A bunch of RCMP members there who I knew. And, they're like, hey, Barry, our condolences, etc. And they allowed me to go in and see the crime scene. And I looked in and I was just like, oh my God, right? That was my baby sister, right? Yeah, one sec here. So,
Take as much time as you need to breathe and focus on kind of that emotion that's coursing through the body. That's tough.
yeah. So prior to that event, um, she was at my parents' place one day, and my mom phones me up. Oh, you need to come down. And I popped down right away. It's my mom, right? My best friend. And uh, my dad and I always had that kind of love-hate relationship as you do with your father sometimes. But my mom's my mom. She's my best friend. And so I'm sitting there at my mom. She brings me a cup of tea. My mom's straight from England. And we're sitting there having tea. And all of a sudden, my sister comes walking out of one of the bedrooms and sits on the couch. And I look at her, and her whole face is just beaten. And she's trying to talk, and her inside of her mouth is ripped apart. And I just kind of look, and I'm just like, the rage I had was just I was just so mad, and I asked her what happened, and she told me that she was brutally raped and beaten, beaten, and the police actually came and arrested the guy because he was able to sneak out, and they basically had an ERT team come in and take the guy into custody, and he was brought into the prison that I worked. So being in custody with this guy was a little bit. I was hoping to get my hands on him, but they wouldn't let me get near him. And so a couple weeks later, that's when my sister took her life. So called the jail up, tell them what happened, and got some time off, dealt with that, and went back to work. And this guy was still in custody. And now other inmates have found out about it. Now I was always a very, very strong-willed individual. They found that key weakness in my heart, and they thrive on that. It was, hey, Rhodes, really here to start. I'm sorry, mention my name, but anyways, hey, we heard about your sister. Hey, if you bring in a package about this big, we'll do this guy in. Bribes all the time. I would never, ever jeopardize myself in that manner. That was just not within my realm of thinking or what at all, period. I had other officers that would, we had our own coping mechanisms as we all do in law enforcement, where I'd have other officers, like, dude, I've got some Glocks at home. I'll bring one in. Just blow the guy away. Just say, you'll get away with it. Just say it was a mental thing. You just lost it. And and they were serious. And I was just like, nah, dude, I'm not. Don't even say, don't say that to me. So things just continue to escalate with the issues, and I would approach my managers and talk to them about it, and the same old thing: suck it up, get back to work. Not much you can do about it. And so then I became a supervisor, a fill-in supervisor, and I was in a medication lineup, and I was always when this person came up for their methadone, I would have to being the officer, would have to get locked up behind a steel door. So I could not get access to this guy. And so one day I was not informed prior to him coming up, and I turned around and he's literally 6 inches from my face. And he's like, I guess you want to kill me, huh? And I just stood there looking at him. And there's a couple other newer officers, so I didn't want to say anything. And he goes, go ahead, take your best shot. There's a camera right above your head. He goes, I could do with a couple $100,000. Go ahead, hit me, because he could see the branch. So just stood there, did my job, and called in somebody else. And we called it the back stairs. Went upstairs to the manager's office, and one of the managers was up there. And I walk in there. I stood at his door, and he's like, oh hey, what's going on? Come on in. And man, I let loose. I'm surprised I did not get fired from the way I attacked this manager. Like I just told him, if I said, if I was able to grab you and bring you across that desk, I said it would not be a good show. And so bunch of rules, new rules, some OPCs were put in place. And so things went fine for a while, but things just seemed to escalate and escalate and escalate. And about month after my sister's death, I was starting to come to that realization. She's gone. She's not here anymore. But I still had to put up with the shit at work. And one day I came into work, and all of a sudden my unit phone rings, and it was like 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, nobody phones me this early on my unit phone. If it was somebody from the bosses or control, it would have been a radio call. And I'm, I just, something told me, don't pick up that phone, don't pick up that phone. And answer the phone, hello. And they're just like, hey, got a incoming call from you. I'm like, okay. I'm like, incoming call. And it's my dad. And I'm just like, hey, what's up? And he's like, your mom's doing too good. I find her unresponsive on the toilet. She's been taken to the hospital. So I guess they were listening on the phone calls up in control. I had another officer at my door relieving me within 30 seconds. I exited the jail. I had 4 supervisors, 3 managers, and a cruiser outside the front doors, and we were at the hospital within 2 minutes, code 4. And I got there before the ambulances did. And so I'm in full uniform, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, one of the nurses go like, where's the offender? I go, what do you mean, what? She goes, are you bringing somebody in? And it didn't just dawn on me, because we're always in uniform when we go into emergency we're bringing in an inmate, right? So I said, no. I said, I'm waiting for my mom's being brought in by an ambulance. Oh, who is it? And she looks at sees my name tag, and she goes, you might want to sit down. And so I sit down, and she goes, your mom's in the emergency ICU right now. She's not doing too good. And I'm just like, man, like, I mean, it just felt like the life was sucked right out of me. Like, I didn't know if I was coming or going. They brought my dad in a second ambulance, and they were monitoring him because he had some heart conditions and he didn't look very good. And I'm thinking to myself, like, man, am I going to lose both my parents on the same day? So my mom went up into ICU, and she ended up being diagnosed with a stroke to the back of the brain. And subsequently, there's absolutely nothing they could do. And she ended up passing away almost a month to the date that my sister did.
You have been through significant loss and too much in life. One quick thing here, just to be very clear, to talk about the impacts that obviously you went through at work of not being supported, or feeling like you weren't being necessarily supported, and being able to be away from the individual that did what he had done to your sister, is incredibly impactful to yourself in a negative aspect. And then to have to also go through the challenges of losing a mother, and all of these different things. How does the story get to a place where you're done with corrections and you've got to move on?
The point where it got to the point for me where, honestly, I didn't give a shit. Period. I didn't give a shit for my personal safety. I didn't give a shit for my colleagues' safety. I didn't give a shit for the inmate safety. I would have fights happen right in front of me, and I would stand there and I would literally watch them for about 10 or 13 seconds or 20 seconds before I'd call for backup or a code. And at that point, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to address it. And then I had to search inmates when they first started coming in, new inmates. So one guy who was a prolific offender, he came in, drop your bag up against the wall, got to search you. And he's, nope, not today, not happening. I said, come on, man, quit screwing around. I got a schedule to keep here. And so he continued on. And then all of a sudden he just looks at me right in the face and goes, how's your sister doing these days? Nate, that point in my life, I still don't know what happened. everything just went black. And a code was called, not for an officer needs assistance. The officers needed assistance to get me off of this guy. And I went upstairs, I went outside, went for a little bit of walk, and I came back in, and my supervisor, two supervisors were in the office, and they look at me and they're just like, "We need to talk to you in the training room." And I said, "What's up?" And they're like, "Well," and I said, "I'm done." I didn't even give them a chance to say anything else. I just said, "I'm done." I said, "I can't do this anymore." I said, "I've jeopardized my safety, officer safety, and the public safety." I said, "I can't do it." And yeah, from that point, it was an uphill battle. I was the first officer to be diagnosed with PTSD in BC, and it was a uphill battle for over 2 years, going through psychologists, doctors, and numerous reports and meetings with WorkSafe. And when I left corrections, it was I thought, hey man, my life's going to change now. Things are getting better. I'm getting retrained. And I took a retraining program, and it, it didn't change, man. I started getting worse. Every month, it just seemed like I just, um, that rabbit hole theory, right? Um, it just seems like my shovel kept getting bigger and the hole kept getting deeper. I didn't know where, I just didn't know when to stop digging.
There's no shame in that. And to paint a picture as to why, I do believe that eventually the body gets to a place where it can no longer handle stress or trauma, especially if it's continually experiencing that in the same environment over and over and over again. So if you don't take action and remove yourself from that environment, I mean, the environment for you definitely was work. There was trauma built into that, and probably trauma everywhere else in life. So the body was literally telling you it was time to shut down. And if you didn't do it and you didn't make the choice or take action to walk away from that environment, it was going to do it for you. The body was going to shut you down. With severe depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever the case is, a person can only handle so much.
Yeah, I think you can take a bottle of pop and shake it up so much before that pop's going to pop off, right? And I think that's what was happening in my life, that, hey, my lid finally blew off. I knew I hit that. I knew when I had to seek help when I was at home and I didn't want to go to the gym, and the gym was my life. My friends, I didn't want to go with my friends. I didn't want to see family. If I went grocery shopping, I would go literally 15 minutes before the store closed because there'd be nobody in there. I'd come right back home, and I went and see my doctor, and he put me on some medication for anxiety to kind of help alleviate some of the pressure. Like, I'd be driving down the road and it would feel like I was going to it felt like I was going to pass out. And so things start to slowly, as you medicate, things change where you're not, your brain's not, the trauma's still there, right? But the medication's just putting a band-aid on it. So I didn't really start to, you know, coming out and dealing with the situations probably, man, over the past, I'd say pretty close to 2 years, wouldn't you, Nate?
Yeah, somewhere in there, I got to be a part at least I think, the start of your healing journey, or at least seeing it happen publicly. I don't know if it happened before that, but that was kind of where I was going to go next. And before I go to the next question, I just want to, again, parallel kind of a very similar experience for me was when I was diagnosed with PTSD as a police officer in 2014. The first thing I said was, okay, I'm going to finally accept what I'm dealing with. What's my next step? And the doctor said, you need to go on an antidepressant. And I asked why, because I wasn't very fond of taking medication to deal with something that was happening. I didn't quite understand the benefits to it. And there was definitely some resistance from my end to go on medication. And something that was told to me in that moment, and it always kind of bothered me, was that this medication is not going to fix things, but it'll at least give you enough of a buffer that you can go on and continue to go to work. And I remember thinking in that moment, for me at least, that how does this make any sense? This is a band-aid. We're not actually dealing with the problem, are we? Then if we're just doing that, we're just creating, a buffer so that I can go back to work. And what is going to happen if I continue to re-experience trauma and all of these different things? So the medication helps until you're ready to really dig into, what does the trauma look like and how do you process some of that stuff? Um,
Yeah, like I look at it now, like we're talking about this medication issue and the band-aids. When I first got on the medication, um, man, life was great. I was back working, things were good, and all of a sudden I'd get managers coming up to me and just go, "You look like a walking zombie. What are you doing here?"
Other people start to recognize you, where you're at. And you might start to hear some feedback about, hey, why do you look this way? Because the body starts to show those signs, the signs of stress and trauma. There's no way you can run from this stuff.
Yeah, it was all yeah, all facial expressions, right? Like it was my physique was still good. I was, in shape, but even some of my closest friends that were there were just kind of like, I had my nickname that I went by, and they all like, dude, like, what's wrong with you? You look like you're not you anymore. Just
Yeah,
put it
for
that way.
sure.
And so I started to recognize that, and then I started to seek help after that because it just wasn't healthy. Like I'd just go home, work, go home, sit down, eat, watch TV. If I had to shop, I'd go shop, go back to work. And then it got to the point where it was just like I said, that one incident where I snapped, that was my boiling point. And uh, from there, it just basically, life outside of corrections, I thought was good. The hardest part was losing my identity on who I was, what I worked for. I was very proud of that uniform. I was a good officer. I've always thrived on the rank and file system and throughout my life, and I missed it big time. And uh, I was lost for a long time. I went to numerous doctors. "Oh, you need to do this. You need." No, I'm not doing. They put me on. One doctor put me on this antipsychotic medication, and thank goodness I still had some of my old kit that I purchased myself. Had a set of handcuffs. Um, I literally was going to hurt myself that day. And I thank goodness my brain was able to kick into fight or flight mode and think, you need to protect yourself. I grabbed a set of handcuffs and handcuffed myself, hands behind the back.
The unfortunate part about post traumatic stress is we can at points get to a place where we no longer want to be alive. And that's definitely what I'm hearing in your story, is that there was a moment where the body is no longer healthy and geared towards keeping it safe. And I'm actually glad that you took a measure that day to keep yourself safe by handcuffing your hands together so you couldn't actually do anything. Now, we've talked a lot about suicide on the podcast, and it definitely sounds like that was a moment where you recognize that whether it was suicidal ideation or the thoughts of actually committing suicide in that moment were very real for you. But we are starting to run out of time here for this episode, and I do want to shift into and not take away our conversation from the importance of having conversation around suicide, because it's incredibly important. And your story definitely touches on it, and I'm grateful that you're still here. But I also want to focus too on how this journey for you now shifts from all of the pain, all of the suffering, the PTSD, everything you've been through. How do you now shift back into, okay, I now need to heal from all of this?
I tried to figure out the heal how for a long time, but the problem was I I kept thinking I was the only guy out there that was going through this. And I came across yourself, and we built up uh, a friendship, I guess, on tech messaging on TikTok and stuff like that. And uh, you're, man, I can't say this without getting choked up, but you've been a huge inspiration in my recovery. I'm not the only guy out there. I've heard other people with your podcast, other people posting stuff on sites, and the support that we get for the jobs that we do, just from the general public now, is just, it touches your heart, and there's people that do care and want you to wake up the next morning and smell the grass and do what you have to do. And like I said, Nate, I can't. Uh, there's no words that could uh, say how much you've impacted my life and uh, brought me out of that rabbit hole, and um, opened up to, I think the only way to really heal is to share. And the only way to share is to understand other people.
Absolutely. That's how we get out of the post-traumatic stress. The trauma is always there. The PTSD may always be there. But in order to take our foot off of the gas pedal and make things better for ourselves, you're right. We have to find people that can help us not feel so alone, and can teach us how to recognize what exactly it is that we're suffering from. And I myself have individuals in my life that I am thankful and grateful for, because they showed me the way, and because of my own healing journey and admissions into what things look like for me, and recognizing I needed to be vulnerable and authentic and talk about, this is what I was going through, this is what some of the struggle looks like. When you start to talk about it, you quickly realize that you're not alone, and you also have other people out there that are struggling, but you may be able to help them out as you heal. And that's a very other critical important part of this, is making sure that when you heal yourself, you also pay it forward. Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing. Like, I think from my own journey too, and I want to hear your thoughts on this specifically. Is there is very much a phase in post traumatic stress where, when we're unwell, the triggers are actually something that we try to avoid completely, or handle it in such a certain way that that too is unhealthy. But all we can do in that moment is try to run from the trigger, or not let it be a part of our lives, right? Try to set up these boundaries so you don't see someone in a red shirt, or have peanut butter in the house, or whatever the case is. But as you start to heal, you now actually get to a place where you can have these things in your life, understand your trigger and get ahead of it, and not maybe necessarily react to the trigger anymore, but hold some space so that you can experience the trigger and still navigate your own life, and still live and teach yourself that you are safe, that this doesn't mean what it used to mean in the past.
And this is where I really think that a lot of agencies could um, thrive on, and their retention rate would probably drop big time, um, is to have people that have gone through the mix. We're not, by all means, giving medical advice or professional, but we understand what the hell they're going through. We've been there. We've walked the walk. We've stood in the shoes. We've been in the trenches. People that go to school to learn in a book, yeah, we appreciate you guys. You're the professionals. We're not knocking you whatsoever. But to walk in somebody's footsteps and understand that just the smell of blood could trigger somebody. The smell of gasoline could trigger somebody from a car accident. For me, there's certain scents that just trigger me, like the smell of Lysol spray that they use in prisons that inmates use. If I smell Lysol spray, boom, triggers me. See the color red? It's a trigger. Peanut butter. The smell of peanut butter is a major trigger for me because inmates make stuff out of peanut butter all the time. Peanut brittle, peanut butter noodles, you name it. So the smell of peanut butter, it's just, now I know these triggers, and I know I'm safe, but they're still there.
I love the advice. I love the perspective. I've cared for you since the day I met you because of the pain that you had and the desire to get out of that painful spot. And I saw the spark still within you. And amazingly enough, as we both embarked on this journey of healing around the same time, we did become close, and we did get to know each other over something. But our own journey has progressed into healing, and we've always kind of been checking in on each other. Hey, are you noticing this? Right. And that's kind of been the cool thing too, is the journey has also been very much shared with you. So I am honored to know you. And I do want to take a quick moment just to say thank you for your advice. And more importantly, thank you for your service to your community and to corrections and that whole beautiful place, because we need good people in there. But more importantly too, thank you for your sacrifice. I know what that looks like. So I do appreciate you, and I do send my love. Thank you for joining us on season 2. If you are a first responder with an incredible story into post-traumatic stress, please reach out and connect with myself. Season 2 is based on your story. And if you want to step up to the plate and share your story with the world, I would be more than honored to help you do that. Thank you for your continued support with this project, and thank you for tuning in today.